What are called barbarians had always been part of the Roman army, but what's called the auxiliary, meaning they would fight alongside of the Roman army, not as part of it.
Yeah.
But there's such a need for fighting men now because if you want to be in power, it's so important to have more legions. They start bringing barbarians into the legions. And then what you're going to have is one day a guy is a Roman commander, the next day he's a barbarian commander attacking Rome. So this is a real problem you have, is you just have this uncertainty of who's actually in control, what your money is worth, and who is actually part of your society. That was part of the conversation on Cleared Hot. I most wanted to land carefully, and we covered so much ground in 2 hours, I never fully developed it. Because here's the actual mechanism Andy and I were circling. Empires don't lose wars first. They lose their armies first. And by the time the wars come, the army that fights isn't the army anyone thinks it is. Rome is the cleanest case study because Rome's demonstrated this pattern across 4 centuries. From citizen soldier of the early Republic, through the Marian Reforms in 107 BC, through the Praetorian crisis of the 3rd century, through a barbarian integration of the 4th century, to the afternoon at Adrianople in 378, when 2/3 of the Eastern Roman field army died, because the military system underneath had already failed them. This is the pattern I want to finish here, how empires actually lose their armies, why it never looks like collapse from the inside, and why Andy's audience, soldiers, veterans, and anyone who's worn a uniform, has the strongest reason of anyone to understand this mechanism clearly. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. This is the Roman Pattern. I'm the CEO of Command Your Brand. You can find us at commandyourbrand.com. If you came here from Cleared Hot, welcome. Andy and I covered a lot of ground. 1913, the Federal Reserve, Constantine, the 5 good emperors, the Punic Wars, the Caesar question, what the fall of America might actually look like. This video focuses on one specific thread underneath all of it, the pattern of how Rome lost its army, because that's the one Andy's audience has the most direct stake in understanding. Before I get into the framework, a few corrections I owe you on the record. First, when I said Augustus beat Mark Antony to become the first Roman emperor, the timeline does matter here. Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. He was granted the title Augustus in 27 BC. The Republic was technically restored in 27 before quietly being hollowed out from underneath. That 4-year gap matters because it's the mechanism. The wars end, the restoration is performed, when the actual takeover happens. I compressed that in the conversation, and we owe you a little bit more information here. Second, when I said barbarians had always been part of the Roman army, that's true, but the distinction is scale and command. Auxiliary units of non-Romans existed in the Republic forward. What changes by the 4th century is the entire legions are composed of Federati, under their own tribal commanders serving under treaty. That's a different institution. I want that on the record because the distinction is the whole point. Third, on Cicero pushing Brutus towards Caesar assassination. I overstated this in the conversation. Cicero supported the conspirators publicly after the assassination, particularly through the Philippics against Antony. His role before March 15, 44 BC is debated. He probably knew, he probably approved, but there's no documented evidence he was the instigator. I owe Cicero that precision on the record. With those corrected, here's the framework. Empires lose their army in 4 stages. Rome ran all 4 stages across roughly 500 years. By the time the 4th stage completes, the war the army loses is almost identical. The army has already stopped being what its name says it is. The 4 stages are sequential. Each one prepares the conditions for the next. None of them look like collapse while they're happening. All of them are visible to anyone who knows where to look. Stage 1, the citizen army. Stage 2, the professional army loyal to its commander. Stage 3, the Praetorian pattern, the army that makes and unmakes its political leaders. Stage 4, the integrated foreign army that wears the uniform but holds different loyalty. Let me walk through each one with Roman evidence. For the first 4 centuries of the Republic, Rome's army was a citizen army. You had to own land to serve. You served when called. You went home when the campaign ended. You funded your own equipment. Your loyalty was to Rome because Rome was your home, your land, your inheritance, your future. This is the army that defeated Carthage. This is the army that conquered Italy and the Western Mediterranean. It worked because the soldier and the citizen were the same person, and the property requirement meant every legionary had something to lose if Rome lost. The system worked as long as Rome's wars stayed close to Italy and the campaigns stayed short. As Rome expanded across the Mediterranean, both conditions failed. The wars got further away. The campaigns got longer. Small farmers who served for years couldn't keep their farms working back home. Land consolidated into large estates worked by slaves. The class of small landowners, the actual base of the citizen army, was hollowed out by the empire its own service was creating. By 107 BC, Rome had a manpower crisis. Not enough citizens met the property requirement. Not enough citizens wanted to serve. The citizen army had run out of citizens. This is the part that always gets missed. The Marian Reforms didn't happen because someone wanted to change the system. They happened because the old system had already broken. In 107 BC, the consul Gaius Marius did 3 things that changed Rome's military forever. He eliminated the property requirement for service. Now any Roman citizen could enlist, including the urban poor who owned nothing. He made the army professional. Soldiers signed up for 16 to 20 years of continuous service. Service became a career, not a civic obligation. And he made the commander responsible for the soldier's pension and post-service land grant. Not the Senate, not Rome, the commander. The third one is the one that quietly changed everything, because now the legionary's economic future depended on his general's political success. If the general couldn't deliver land grants when the legion was discharged, which required Senate approval, which required political leverage, the soldiers got nothing. So the soldiers had a direct material interest in their commander winning his political fights. The citizen soldier was loyal to Rome because Rome was his home. The professional soldier under the Marian system was loyal to his commander because his commander was his retirement plan. It took roughly 2 generations for the consequences to fully appear. Marius himself uses the loyalty of his new legions to march on Rome in 88 BC. Sulla does the same thing in response. Pompey builds his career on it. By the time Caesar crosses the Rubicon in 49 BC, the principle is fully established. A legion's loyalty belongs to whoever pays it, leads it, and rewards it. The state is downstream of loyalty, not upstream. Now the first clip.
Yeah.
The thing that was different in Rome is if you look at the Punic Wars were in the late Republic, right, where Rome is fighting Carthage. One of the major things that changes after that, they go from citizen soldiers to a professional army. And a lot of these generals actually had private armies where they're the ones now paying them. So they have loyalty not to Rome, but to their commander.
Yeah.
So if the guy that is in charge is paying you, well, that does change how it functions, right?
For sure.
We don't have in our military.
Which I think is beneficial.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
There's like, hey, there's, private contractor, government contractor stuff. They pale in comparison in capability.
That's stage 2 complete. The army still wears a Roman uniform. The standards are still SPQR. The forms are preserved. Underneath, the loyalty is transferred from the state to the man. Once the loyalty is transferred from state to commander, the political consequences follow automatically. The army discovers that it can choose its own emperor, and once it makes that discovery, it never unmakes it. Augustus established the Praetorian Guard in 27 BC, nominally an elite imperial bodyguard, structurally the first standing army permanently stationed in Italy. Within 70 years, they were assassinating emperors. Caligula in 41. They installed Claudius. They take payment for installing him. The principle is now monetized. By the 3rd century, the pattern has escaped containment. Between 235 and 284, a 49-year period, Rome has at least 26 men claim the title of emperor. Most of them are declared emperor by their legions, march on Rome, kill the previous emperor, rule for a few months or years, then are killed by their own troops when the next claimant offers more. This is the Praetorian pattern at full scale. The emperor is whoever the army decides he is. The army decides based on who pays best, who promises most, who can extract enough from the treasury and the provinces to fund the next round. Aurelian briefly broke the pattern in the 270s. He reconquered the breakaway empires. He fixed the currency by raising silver content. He restored institutional order. His own Praetorian Guard assassinated him in 275 for his trouble. The political class killed the man who was trying to fix the political class. The army killed the emperor who was trying to fix the army. The state has lost control of its own military. The military has not lost discipline. It remains a fighting force. It still wins battles when it chooses to fight. What it has lost is its loyalty to anything other than itself and its immediate paymaster. By the 4th century, Rome faces a different problem. The professional army that emerged from the Marian Reforms is still a recruitment system that depends on citizens willing to enlist. 3 centuries of compounding institutional crisis, currency debasement, citizenship dilution, and political instability has destroyed the recruitment base. So Rome solves the problem by importing soldiers. The policy isn't new. Auxiliary units of non-Romans had existed since the Republic. What changes by the late 4th century is scale and command structure. Entire legions are composed of Federati, barbarian tribes serving under treaty rather than as Roman citizens. They serve under their own tribunal commanders. They wear Roman armor. They fight in Roman formations. Their primary loyalty is to their tribe, their treaty, and their commander, not to Rome. This is the stage where the army stops being what its name says it is. The standard still reads SPQR. The Latin commands are still issued. The officer corps still includes Roman citizens. But the manpower underneath is no longer Roman in any meaningful sense. The institution has been hollowed out and refilled with something else. And the Federati commanders rise through the ranks. By the late 4th century, Roman generals like Stilicho, half Vandal, fully Romanized, commanding Roman legions composed largely of barbarian troops, are running the Western Empire's military. A century later, when the Western Empire formally ends in 476, it ends because a barbarian general named Odoacer, commanding what nominally Roman legions, decides there's no longer any point pretending the teenage emperor he's keeping in Ravenna actually matters. He sends the imperial regalia back to Constantinople. Nobody fights him for it. There's no Roman army left to fight with. The Roman army is with him. Now the second clip. What are called barbarians had always been part of the Roman army, but what's called the auxiliary, meaning they would fight alongside of the Roman army, not as part of it.
Yeah.
But there's such a need for fighting men now because if you want to be in power, it's so important to have more legions. They start bringing barbarians into the legions. And then what you're going to have is one day a guy is a Roman commander, the next day he's a barbarian commander attacking Rome. That's stage 4. The army is barbarian in composition, barbarian in command, Roman in branding. When it eventually attacks Rome, it isn't really an invasion. It's a managerial change inside the institution that had already become something else. The 4 stages come together on August 9th, 378, outside a town called Adrianople in what's now Turkey. The Eastern Roman Emperor Valens marched 2/3 of the Eastern Field Army into a field to engage a Gothic army that had been settled inside Roman territory as Federati. The Goths had revolted after being exploited by Roman governors who invited them in. The Roman army that Valens commanded that day was a stage 4 army, underfunded because the currency was failing, under-recruited because Roman citizens didn't want to serve, stretched thin because the Praetorian pattern had killed institutional continuity, composed partly of other Federati whose loyalties were ambiguous, commanded by an emperor who couldn't afford to wait for reinforcements because waiting would have signaled weakness in a system that punished an honest assessment of weakness. 2/3 of the army died that afternoon. Valens died too. His body was never recovered. The Western Empire technically survived another 98 years, but the military system that had built Rome, even its degraded Marian reform, never recovered. Every year after 378 was managed decline. Shorter defense lines, more mercenaries, more barbarian settlements inside its borders, more of the same policy that created the Gothic crisis in the first place. Adrianople wasn't the cause of decline. It was the moment the 4-stage patterns compounding became visible, and all at once in a single afternoon. This is the pattern. 4 stages. Each one looks like an adaptation while it's happening. Each one preserves the visible form, the uniform, the standards, the language, the institutions, while the underlying loyalties transfer somewhere else. Stage 1, the citizen army, loyal to the state because the soldier and the citizen are the same person. Stage 2, the professional army under the Marian Reforms, loyal to the commander because the commander is the soldier's economic future. Stage 3, the Praetorian pattern, loyalty to whomever pays the best because the army has discovered it can choose its own paymasters. Stage 4, the integrated foreign army, loyal to tribe, treaty, and personal commander because the institution itself no longer commands loyalty. Each stage is downstream of institutional decay that produces it. Currency debasement starves the recruitment system. Political short-sightedness drives the Praetorian pattern. Identity erosion makes the Federati solution look reasonable. The three patterns I usually talk about on this channel, money, identity, politics, are upstream causes. The military loyalty transfer is downstream consequence. And once the army is at stage 4, the question isn't whether the empire falls. The question is which barbarian general inside the institution decides to stop pretending first. Andy asked me near the end of our conversation whether America is on the same path that Rome was on. The answer depends on which stage you think we're in. The American military is still recruited primarily from American citizens. So we haven't hit stage 4, but the recruitment system is under measurable strain. The propertied citizen base of stage 1 was hollowed out by Rome's own expansion. Whether something analogous is happening in our own recruitment base is a question where they're asking honestly rather than reflexively. What's clearly visible is that loyalty patterns inside the institution have been shifting. Veterans of the post-2001 wars often describe loyalty to their unit, to their commander, to the men next to them, not the state that sent them. That's stage 2 operating in microcosm. It doesn't mean stage 3 is coming. It doesn't mean the institutional conditions that allowed stage 3 in Rome are present in the same form here. The structural question is whether the political class has done what Rome's political class did. Turned the army into something the political class no longer fully controls, but no longer fully serves. If the answer is yes, the historical record is clear about what comes next. Now the third clip.
We're going to go down the same path as Rome.
So I think here's the one thing to point out is the discussion I have a lot is, as I mentioned, Rome has 3 periods in time, 4 if you want to count the East. It's a republic in a kingdom in 753 BC. It becomes a republic in 509 BC, and then an empire in 31, and then it falls in 476 AD. But the Eastern Roman Empire goes until 1453 when it's conquered by the Ottomans. So you could really look at it as 4 eras in time. The argument people often want to make, that's the question Andy was asking. That's the question this whole channel exists to address. The honest answer is we don't know which stage we're in because the stages don't announce themselves. Rome's citizens in 107 BC didn't know the Marian Reforms were the beginning of anything. Rome's citizens in 250 didn't know the Praetorian pattern was already terminal. Rome's citizens in 350 watched Federati settle and cried the borders and thought it was a sensible policy. What you can do is recognize the framework. Once you see the 4 stages clearly, you can watch your own moment and ask honestly which stage the institutions around you are running. This is how empires actually lose their armies. Not in one battle, not in one war, not in a moment of dramatic collapse. Through 4 stages of compounding loyalty transfer that preserve the visible institution while replacing what it actually serves. Rome ran all 4 stages across 500 years. By the time the wars were lost, the army that lost them wasn't the army anyone thought it was anymore. The question for our own moment isn't whether the pattern can run here. The pattern is run in every empire that's ever existed at scale. The question is which stage we're already in. Same playbook, different century. Same result. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. This has been the Roman Pattern. I'll see you Monday.